Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something that impacts all of us, empowerment in teams. We've got some really interesting research lined up from psychology journals and management studies, even a peek into how high-stakes teams like astronauts operate.
It's super fascinating, because empowerment is often presented as this universally good thing. But, as we dig into the research, it's clear that there's a lot more to the story.
Right, and that's what I love about these deep dives. There's always more beneath the surface. So before we even talk about teams, I think it's important to break down what empowerment really means. Our sources point to a few different types: psychological, organizational, role-based. And then there's this idea of embedded empowerment. So can you break those down for us a bit?
Sure. Well, imagine you're given a list of tasks at work, right? That might be role empowerment, you have a lot of responsibilities. But true autonomy, which falls under psychological empowerment, means you have control over how you do those tasks. That sense of ownership is what really drives motivation and performance.
Okay, that makes sense. So more empowerment automatically equals better teamwork and results, right?
Well, not necessarily. A lot of management literature might make you think so. But the research is mixed. Some studies show a clear link, others show mixed results, and some even suggest potential downsides. It really depends on the context. It's not a simple equation.
Interesting. Can you give an example of that? How does context change the impact?
Absolutely. There's a really interesting study on German works councils. These are groups that give employees a formal voice in company decisions. And the study found that the impact of these councils on performance actually varied. It depended on things like company size and how well the management and unions work together.
That's a great illustration of why context matters. Let's shift gears for a minute and look at this embedded empowerment concept. Our sources use human resource management, or HRM, as a key example.
Right. HRM systems that have empowerment built in are interesting, but there are some limitations with the research connecting these practices to performance. A lot of it depends on self-reported data from just one person in the company, which could obviously create some bias.
That's a good point. And here's something that really struck me. Very few studies actually look at whether specific empowerment practices within HRM, like giving employees more control over their work, are the real reason for positive results. It could be other factors altogether. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a good reminder that we should be cautious about drawing conclusions. We need to dig deeper and consider all the possible factors at play. Simply assuming it's all due to empowerment could lead companies down the wrong path.
So empowerment is not a guaranteed win, but it's definitely a powerful tool when used strategically. What else should we be thinking about when building high-performing teams? Our sources mentioned this input process output model. What is that exactly?
It's a framework that helps us understand all the elements that go into effective teamwork. Think of it like this. You have inputs, like the individual skills and experience of your team members. Then you have the processes, how the team communicates, makes decisions, and resolves conflicts. Finally, you have the outputs, like the actual work product or the team's overall performance. Each of these elements can be influenced by empowerment, but they also depend on a lot of other factors.
So it's not just about empowering the team. It's about understanding how that empowerment interacts with all these other pieces of the puzzle. Our sources also touch on high-reliability organizations like NASA, where teamwork can literally be a matter of life and death. What can we learn from those teams?
High-reliability organizations have to perform flawlessly under immense pressure. And they've learned that encouraging a culture where everyone feels safe to speak up is crucial, even about small concerns. This psychological safety allows team members to catch potential errors early on, and that prevents much bigger problems down the line.
Makes sense. And now let's talk about a trend that's changing the way a lot of us work these days: virtual teams. Technology has made it possible to collaborate across countries and time zones, but it also presents unique challenges, right? What are some of the things that make virtual teamwork so tricky?
Well, distance can create barriers to communication, and it can make it harder to build that trust that's necessary for real empowerment to take hold. It can also exacerbate information sampling biases.
Information sampling biases, what are those? And how do they impact virtual teams?
Imagine a virtual team working on a marketing campaign. They're spread out across different countries, relying mainly on emails to communicate. Everyone's sharing the same articles and online trends, but they might be missing out on a team member's unique understanding of their local market. That kind of knowledge gap can really impact the campaign's success.
That's a great example. So how do you overcome that bias in a virtual environment where you're not always getting those casual in-person interactions?
One key strategy is to explicitly identify everyone's areas of expertise within the team. This ensures that each member's unique knowledge and experience are recognized and leveraged. And it's also crucial to foster a culture of active knowledge sharing. Encourage team members to proactively share their insights, perspectives, and local knowledge, even if it doesn't seem immediately relevant to the task at hand. You never know when those seemingly unrelated pieces of information might connect and spark a breakthrough.
That's a great point. Building those connections and fostering a sense of shared understanding is so vital for any team, but especially when you're working remotely. As we're talking about all these different factors that influence team dynamics, I'm struck by how much leadership seems to play a role. Our sources really emphasize the impact of leaders on creating an empowering environment. What are some of the key things leaders can do to foster empowerment within their teams?
Well, one of the most important things leaders can do is model the behaviors they want to see in their teams. If you want your team members to feel empowered to take ownership and make decisions, you need to demonstrate that you trust them to do. So that means giving them the autonomy to make choices, providing them with the resources they need to succeed, and supporting them when they make mistakes.
So it's about creating that sense of psychological safety we were talking about earlier, but on a leadership level.
Exactly. Leaders who micromanage, constantly second guess their team's decisions, or punish mistakes create a culture of fear and disempowerment in those environments. People are less likely to take risks, share their ideas, or go the extra mile. It becomes more about self-preservation than achieving shared goals.
That makes sense. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you treat people like they can't be trusted to make good decisions, they'll eventually start to believe it themselves. Our sources also touch on the importance of leaders recognizing and valuing the diverse experiences their team members bring to the table. Why is that so critical for fostering empowerment?
When leaders acknowledge and appreciate the unique skills, perspectives, and backgrounds of their team members, they send a powerful message. You are valued. Your contributions matter. That sense of belonging and recognition can be incredibly empowering. It helps people feel seen and heard, which in turn makes them more likely to engage, fully share their ideas, and contribute their best work.
I can definitely see how that ties back to the concept of psychological safety and that sense of trust. When you feel valued for who you are and what you bring to the table, it's much easier to speak up and take risks and really own your contributions to the team. Another theme that keeps popping up in our sources is this idea that empowerment isn't just about giving people more control over their work. It's also about giving them opportunities to learn, grow, and develop their skills. Why is that so important?
Think of it this way. If someone feels stagnant in their role, like they're not learning anything new or being challenged to grow, that can be incredibly disempowering. It can lead to boredom, frustration, and a sense of being stuck, on the other hand, when people feel like they're constantly learning, expanding their skill set, and moving forward in their careers. It can be incredibly motivating and empowering. It gives them a sense of purpose and progress, which in turn makes them more engaged and invested in their work.
So it's about fostering a culture of continuous learning and development, but it's not just about throwing training courses at people, right? It's about creating opportunities for them to apply those new skills, take on new challenges, and really stretch themselves.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture where learning is integrated into the fabric of everyday work that might involve mentorship programs, job shadowing opportunities, cross-functional projects, or simply giving people the freedom to experiment and try new things.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about giving people the space and the support to grow and evolve both individually and as a team. Our sources also spend a lot of time discussing work experience and its relationship to empowerment. We tend to assume that the more experience you have, the more empowered you are, but is that always the case?
It's not as straightforward as you might think. While experience is undoubtedly valuable, it's not simply about the number of years you've been on the job, it's about the quality of those experiences, the types of challenges you face, the skills you've developed, and how you've reflected on and learned from those experiences. Someone who's been in the same role for 10 years without taking on new challenges or seeking out learning opportunities might not be as empowered as someone who's only been in their role for a few years but has actively sought out ways to grow and expand their skill set.
That's a really interesting point. So how can organizations help their employees gain the kind of experience that truly empowers them?
Organizations need to be more intentional about how they cultivate and leverage the experience of their employees. That means creating systems and structures that support continuous learning, skill development, and career growth. It also means giving people opportunities to apply their skills in different contexts, work on challenging projects, and take on leadership roles.
It sounds like we're talking about a shift in mindset, both for organizations and individuals. Organizations need to stop viewing experience as something that simply accumulates over time. and start seeing it as something that needs to be actively cultivated and nurtured, and individuals need to take ownership of their own development, seeking out challenges and opportunities for growth.
That's exactly right. And that's where empowerment really comes into play, when individuals feel empowered to take ownership of their own development, and organizations create a culture that supports and encourages that growth. Everyone benefits.
That's a great way to put it. As we've been diving deep into this topic of empowerment, I've been thinking about how all these different threads we've been discussing, leadership experience, learning culture, all weave together to create the fabric of a truly empowering work environment.
Absolutely. It's not about any one single element. It's about how all these different factors interact and reinforce each other. When you have strong leadership that supports empowerment, a culture that values learning and growth, and systems in place to help people develop their skills and experience, you create a powerful force for positive change.
It really does feel like empowerment is less of a switch you flip and more of an ongoing process.
Yeah, it's a journey, not a destination.
So for our listener out there who's been with us on this deep dive, what are the key takeaways here?
Well, first off, I think it's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to empowerment. It's got to be tailored to the specific team, the organization, even the individuals involved.
Right. What works for one company might totally backfire in another.
Exactly. And it's also not something you can just implement overnight and expect instant results. It takes time and consistent effort to build that kind of culture.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another key takeaway. Leadership matters.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Leaders really set the tone for the whole organization. Their actions can either foster a sense of empowerment or completely kill it.
Couldn't agree more.
So if you're in a leadership position, it's crucial to take a step back and reflect on your own behavior. Are you modeling the kind of empowerment you want to see in your team? Are you giving people the autonomy, the resources, the support they need to thrive?
And if you're not in a leadership role, don't underestimate your own influence. You can still advocate for empowerment within your own sphere.
Exactly. Speak up, share your ideas, encourage your colleagues to do the same. Every voice matters.
It really does.
And finally, remember that empowerment is an ongoing journey. There will always be new challenges, new opportunities to learn and grow,
So stay curious, stay engaged, and keep pushing those boundaries.
both individually and as a team.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive, and it leaves me with a question for our listener. What does empowerment look like in your work or even your personal life?
Are there areas where you could give yourself or others more autonomy? What would it take to create a truly empowering environment for you and the people around you?
These are questions worth thinking about.
We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
We'll see you next time.